comment. Since I retired, I've been more aware of the fact that, of course, property tax takes a huge chunk of my limited income. And I remember the budget committee to try to watch the property taxes, and been somewhat successful, not every day, but I keep yelling and screaming. But anyway, back to this. I had the property tax, which we all agree is regressive. If you're retired, if you're lucky, you might have some interest in dividends and give the salary. You get taxed on that in New Hampshire, okay? And they're going to have a capital gains tax. Welcome to being retired in New Hampshire if you can afford to live here to start with. It's getting worse for retired people. Not saying that the limit on the capital gains is some huge amount. I haven't reached that yet from what the rumor is. But if we want to keep everything under control, it has to be something more graduated, like you're saying, with an income tax. A sales tax is regressive because the poorest people pay the same property sales tax as a rich person does on item A or B. Okay, the only argument you could give opposing that is they're going to buy a Mercedes instead of a used Chevrolet like me, okay? But on the other hand, income tax, if you're going to introduce any type of new tax in New Hampshire, it's got to be graduated. It can't be more of this regressive stuff because it's already regressive. We have all the regressive taxes we need in New Hampshire. That's my point. So if we're going to try to sell something graduated and stop killing everybody with the regressive property tax, we have to come up with a solution. And you've mentioned income tax, but how are you going to convince people that that's, and then how are you going to use that to replace the property tax? Because what everybody will argue and say is, oh, you're going to have property tax and income tax. We're going to end up paying more, period. So you're going to have some way of shifting it. Following? You're not going to sell it unless you can shift it, in my mind. Thank you.
Great. Who wants to take it first?
Well, I thought I should mention, because someone mentioned it, that there was, I guess it was Neil, a plan that was before the legislature about 10 years ago to deal with the property tax and with school funding and with actually a whole host of issues all at the same time. And it was a plan for the state to fund a substantial part of the cost of education, about 2/3 of total costs. And it was a plan for a 4% income tax with exemptions of, depending on which version it was, $10,000 or $11,000 or $12,000 per adult, and around $3,000 per child would be your exemption. And there would be a statewide property tax of, at the time it was $6.60, I think. It started at $8 anyhow, a statewide property tax. But there was an exemption for your primary residence. And the reason for the two taxes to support education was that we didn't want the out-of-state property owners to get a big break if we just did an income tax, because then we cut their property tax on their beachfront home and ride. For someone from Massachusetts, then we get a big break at the expense of the New Hampshire people paying the income tax. So the idea was you have two taxes, but you only pay one. If you're an in-state person, you pay the income tax, you don't pay the property tax. And if you're an out-of-state person, you pay the property tax, but you don't pay the income tax. That way, everybody pays. And the plan was put together. It would repeal the interest and dividends tax, repeal the business enterprise tax, and it would have cut property taxes on homeowners about 50% across the state. That was the plan. It passed the House and the Senate, but it never made it to the governor's desk because the differences between one and the other and a veto threat, and something increased the property tax 7.5% from that point forward. I still think that we can reform our tax system, and I agree with your point that we will never sell it unless we can explain to people this is not a new tax on top of what you're paying now. It's meant to replace half of what you're paying now in property tax.
That's absolutely